She stood at the roadside with a basket of oranges balanced on her head. Dust covered her feet. Sweat ran down her face. Cars passed by without stopping. Nobody cared about the woman selling fruit under the burning sun. But just 3 years ago, she owned a business. She wore nice dresses. She had a home and a husband. Now, she had nothing. Her husband threw her out when her company crashed. He called her useless. He signed divorce papers without looking back. She never imagined that one man would change everything, and then take it all away again. Her name was Grace. She grew up in a small town where people knew each other by name. Her parents sold vegetables at the market. They taught her to work hard and dream big. Grace finished school and moved to the city. She wanted more than what her parents had. She wanted success. At 24, she met David. He worked at a bank and drove a clean car. He smiled at her during a friend's party. They talked all night. David made her feel special. He promised her a good life. 6 months later, they got married. Grace thought she found her partner. She thought they would build something together. David's family had money. His father owned property. His mother wore gold jewelry and looked down at Grace. She told David he married beneath him. But David didn't listen at first. He supported Grace when she started her clothing business. She sold dresses to women in the neighborhood. Business grew fast. Grace opened a small shop. She hired 2 workers. She felt proud. For 3 years, everything seemed perfect. Grace made good money. David got promoted at the bank. They moved into a bigger apartment. They talked about having children. Grace believed her hard work paid off. She believed David loved her for who she was. Then things changed. The economy got bad. People stopped buying clothes. Grace's shop struggled. She borrowed money to keep the business running. She worked longer hours. She skipped meals. David started complaining. He said she wasted his money. He said she didn't know how to run a business. His mother's voice grew louder in his head. Grace tried to save the shop. She sold everything she owned. She begged customers to come back, but nothing worked. After 6 months of fighting, the business died. Grace closed the shop. She owed money to suppliers. She owed rent. She felt like a failure. David changed completely. He stopped talking to her. He came home late. He slept in the guest room. His mother visited more often. She reminded him that Grace brought nothing into the marriage. She told him to move on. David listened this time. One evening, David came home with papers in his hand. Grace was cooking dinner. She tried to make his favorite meal. She hoped it would bring them closer. He dropped the papers on the kitchen table. Grace looked at them. Her hands shook. "What is this?" she asked. "Divorce papers. Sign them," David said. His voice sounded cold. He didn't look at her. Grace felt her heart break into pieces. She begged him to think about what they had. She reminded him of their wedding vows. She told him she would find work. She promised things would get better. David didn't care. He said she embarrassed him. He said his friends laughed at him for marrying someone like her. He wanted her gone. Grace cried for hours. She refused to sign. But David gave her no choice. He stopped paying rent. He cut off her phone. He took the car keys. He made sure she had nowhere to go. His mother came the next day with a lawyer. They threatened to throw Grace out on the street with nothing. They called her names. They said she was trash. Grace had no family in the city. Her parents passed away 2 years earlier. She had no siblings. Her friends disappeared when her business failed. Nobody wanted to be around someone who lost everything. Grace felt completely alone. She signed the papers with tears running down her face. David didn't say goodbye. He walked out of the apartment and never looked back. His mother smiled as she took the papers. She told Grace to leave by morning. Grace packed her clothes in 2 bags. She had no money. She had no place to sleep. She walked out into the night with nothing but shame and pain. Grace found a shelter for women. She shared a room with 5 other women. Some were running from violent husbands. Others lost their homes to poverty. Grace felt like the world crushed her. She cried herself to sleep every night. She wondered why life turned so cruel. She wondered if she deserved this punishment. After 2 weeks, the shelter told Grace she had to leave. They needed the space for other women. Grace had nowhere to go. She spent 3 nights sleeping on benches in the park. Men followed her at night. She felt unsafe. She knew she needed to find work fast. Grace walked through the market looking for jobs. Shop owners turned her away. They said she looked too tired. They said she had no experience selling on the streets. Nobody wanted to hire her. Grace felt hopeless. An old woman selling oranges saw Grace crying. Her name was Mama Joy. She asked Grace what happened. Grace told her everything. Mama Joy shook her head. She said men could be cruel. She offered Grace a chance. She said Grace could sell oranges with her and split the money. Grace agreed immediately. Selling oranges was harder than Grace imagined. She had to wake up at 4 in the morning. She walked to the farm to buy fruit. She carried heavy baskets on her head. Her neck hurt. Her feet bled. The sun burned her skin. Rain soaked her clothes. People shouted at her to move. Some insulted her. Others tried to cheat her out of money. Grace made just enough money to eat 1 meal a day. She rented a tiny room in a crumbling building. The roof leaked. Rats ran across the floor at night. The toilet didn't work. But it was better than sleeping outside. Grace told herself this was temporary. She told herself things would get better. But months passed and nothing changed. She saw David once. He drove past her in a new car. A beautiful woman sat next to him. They laughed together. David didn't even notice Grace standing on the corner with her basket of oranges. Grace felt invisible. She felt like her life didn't matter anymore. Mama Joy became Grace's only friend. She encouraged Grace when she wanted to give up. She shared food when Grace had nothing. She reminded Grace that life could change in a moment. Grace didn't believe her. She thought her story was over. She thought she would die poor and forgotten. One Wednesday afternoon, Grace stood at her usual corner near the business district. Traffic moved slowly. People rushed past her without looking. Grace called out to them to buy her oranges. Most ignored her. A few shouted at her to be quiet. A black car stopped at the traffic light in front of her. The windows were tinted. Grace walked closer. She lifted her basket higher so the driver could see the fruit. The window rolled down. A man sat in the back seat. He wore an expensive suit. His watch shined in the sunlight. He looked at Grace with kind eyes. "How much for all of them?" he asked. Grace was surprised. Nobody ever bought everything. She calculated quickly and told him the price. The man pulled out his wallet. He handed her 3 times the amount she asked for. Grace stared at the money. "Sir, this is too much," she said. "Keep it. You look like you need it," he replied. The light turned green. The car drove away. Grace stood there holding the money. She couldn't believe what just happened. The next day, the same car stopped at the same corner. The man bought all her oranges again. He gave her more money than she asked for. This happened every day for 2 weeks. Grace began to expect him. She made sure her oranges were the best ones. She cleaned her dress. She combed her hair. One day, the man stepped out of the car. He was tall and handsome. His name was Mr. Richard Lawson. He owned hotels and construction companies. He was one of the richest men in the city. Grace didn't know this at first. She just thought he was generous. "Why do you keep buying my oranges?" Grace asked. "Because I see something special in you," Richard said. "You remind me of my mother. She sold fruit on the streets to raise me. She worked hard every day. She never gave up. I see that same strength in you." Grace felt tears come to her eyes. Nobody spoke to her with respect in years. Nobody saw her as anything more than a poor street seller. Richard's words touched something deep inside her. She didn't know this meeting would change everything. Richard started coming to see Grace every day. They talked while traffic moved around them. He asked about her life. Grace told him about her failed business and her cruel ex-husband. She told him about losing everything. Richard listened without judging her. He didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her like she mattered. One day, Richard made an offer. He said he needed someone to manage the gift shop in one of his hotels. He asked if Grace wanted the job. Grace couldn't believe it. She asked why he would trust her. Richard said he saw potential in her. He said her past didn't define her future. Grace accepted immediately. She started working at the hotel the following week. The job paid well. She could afford a better room. She bought new clothes. She ate proper meals. For the first time in 2 years, Grace felt human again. She felt hope growing inside her chest. Richard checked on her often. He gave her advice on managing the shop. He encouraged her ideas. Grace worked hard to prove herself. Sales increased. Customers loved her friendly attitude. Richard noticed her dedication. He promoted her to assistant manager of the hotel after 6 months. Grace couldn't believe how her life turned around. She went from selling oranges on the street to working in a 5-star hotel. She managed staff. She wore professional clothes. She earned respect. People called her Miss Grace instead of ignoring her. She felt proud of herself again. But something else was growing. Grace started to have feelings for Richard. She tried to ignore them. She told herself he was her boss, and she shouldn't think that way. But Richard treated her differently than other employees. He brought her coffee. He asked about her dreams. He made her laugh. Grace felt confused. Richard felt the same way. He admired Grace's strength. He loved how she never complained about her past. He loved her kindness to others despite what she suffered. He knew she was special from the first day he saw her on that street corner. But he didn't want to rush things. He wanted to make sure his feelings were real. Richard invited Grace to dinner one Friday evening. He said it was to celebrate her promotion. They went to a beautiful restaurant on top of a tall building. The city lights sparkled below them. Grace felt nervous. She never ate at a place like this before. Richard ordered food and wine. They talked about everything. He told her about growing up poor. His father left when he was young. His mother worked 3 jobs to feed him and his sister. She died before she could see him become successful. That's why he never forgot where he came from. That's why Grace reminded him of the strength that built him. Grace shared more of her story. She talked about the shame she felt when David threw her away. She talked about the nights she went to bed hungry. She talked about wanting to give up. Richard reached across the table and held her hand. He told her she was the bravest person he knew. That night changed everything. Grace realized Richard saw her, really saw her, not the failure, not the poor woman, but the person inside who never stopped fighting. Richard realized he was falling in love. He didn't care about her past. He cared about who she was now. They started dating. Richard took her to movies. They walked in the park on Sunday mornings. They talked for hours on the phone. Grace felt happy for the first time in years. She felt safe. She felt valued. Richard made her believe she deserved good things. People noticed. Hotel staff whispered about them. Some were happy for Grace, others were jealous. They said Grace was using Richard for his money. They said she was a gold digger who came from the streets. Grace heard the gossip. It hurt her. But Richard told her to ignore them. He said people always talked when they saw someone rise from nothing. David found out about Grace and Richard. His new girlfriend left him. His job fired him for stealing money. He was broke and bitter. When he heard Grace was dating a billionaire, he felt rage. He couldn't believe the woman he called trash was now living better than him. His mother told him to leave it alone, but David's pride wouldn't let him. After 1 year of dating, Richard decided to propose. He planned everything carefully. He rented a beach house for the weekend. He told Grace to pack a bag. They drove to the coast early Saturday morning. Grace loved the ocean. She had never been to a beach before. They spent the day walking on the sand. They collected shells. They watched dolphins jump in the waves. Grace felt completely at peace. She didn't know Richard had a ring in his pocket. She didn't know this was the day her life would change again. That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky turned orange and pink. Richard held Grace's hand. He told her he never believed in love at first sight until he met her. He said she changed his life. He said she made him want to be better. Then he got down on one knee. Grace started crying before he even asked the question. Richard pulled out a diamond ring. He asked her to marry him. Grace said yes immediately. She couldn't stop shaking. She couldn't believe this was real. A year ago, she was sleeping in a shelter. Now she was engaged to a man who loved her. A man who saw her worth when the world said she had none. They got married 3 months later. The wedding was small and beautiful. Grace wore a white dress that made her feel like a princess. Richard's sister stood next to her. Mama Joy cried tears of happiness in the front row. Grace wished her parents were there to see this day, but she felt their presence in her heart. David tried to crash the wedding. He showed up drunk and angry. He screamed that Grace was his wife first. He said she didn't deserve happiness. Security removed him before he could cause more trouble. Grace felt sorry for him. She realized he was broken inside. She realized leaving him was the best thing that ever happened to her. Grace and Richard went to Paris for their honeymoon. Grace saw the Eiffel Tower. She ate French food. She walked streets she only saw in movies. Richard watched her face light up with joy. He knew he made the right choice. He knew Grace was the woman he wanted beside him forever. A marriage to Richard changed Grace's life completely. They lived in a mansion with 10 bedrooms. Grace had staff who cooked and cleaned for her. She wore designer clothes. She attended charity events with other wealthy women. Everything felt like a dream. But Grace didn't forget where she came from. She started a program to help women in poverty. She hired women from shelters to work at Richard's hotels. She gave them training and second chances. She wanted other women to have what Richard gave her. She wanted them to know their past didn't destroy their future. Richard supported everything she did. He donated money to her programs. He built a training center for women learning job skills. People noticed their work. Newspapers wrote articles about them. They called Grace and Richard the couple who gave back. Grace felt proud. She felt like her suffering had purpose now. Grace and Richard talked about having children. Richard wanted a family. Grace wanted to give him children. They tried for 6 months before Grace got pregnant. When the doctor confirmed it, they both cried with happiness. Richard kissed her stomach. He talked to the baby even though it was too small to hear. Grace felt complete. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. Grace felt sick all the time. She couldn't eat. She lost weight instead of gaining it. The doctor said some women had harder pregnancies than others. He told her to rest. Richard hired nurses to stay with her. He canceled business trips to be home. He worried constantly. Grace tried to stay positive. She decorated the nursery. She bought tiny clothes. She read books about being a mother. She imagined holding her baby. She imagined teaching the child everything her parents taught her. She wanted to be the best mother in the world. But her body kept getting weaker. By the 7th month, Grace could barely walk. Her blood pressure went up. The doctor put her on bed rest. Richard stayed by her side every day. He read to her. He held her hand. He told her everything would be fine. But fear lived in his eyes. Grace saw it. She felt it too. Grace went into labor 2 weeks early. Richard was in a meeting when the nurse called him. He rushed home immediately. Grace was in pain. Her face looked pale. The ambulance arrived and took them to the hospital. Richard held her hand the entire ride. He told her to breathe. He told her she was strong. The doctors examined Grace. Her blood pressure was dangerously high. The baby's heart rate kept dropping. They said they needed to do an emergency surgery. Grace was scared. She gripped Richard's hand tighter. She told him she loved him. Richard kissed her forehead. He told her everything would be okay. But his voice shook. They took Grace to the operating room. Richard paced outside. He prayed. He bargained with God. He promised to give away everything he owned if Grace survived. Time moved slowly. Every minute felt like an hour. Richard felt helpless. He couldn't fix this with money. He couldn't control what happened behind those doors. A nurse came out holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. It was a girl. She was tiny and perfect. Richard stared at his daughter. He felt overwhelming love, but he needed to see Grace. He needed to know she was okay. The nurse's face told him something was wrong before she spoke. "Your wife is bleeding. The doctors are trying to stop it. You need to wait here," she said. She handed him his daughter and walked away. Richard held his baby girl. She had Grace's nose. She had his eyes. Tears ran down his face. He kissed his daughter's head. He whispered that her mother was a fighter. The surgeon came out an hour later. His scrubs had blood on them. Richard's heart sank. The surgeon looked tired and sad. He said they did everything they could. He said Grace lost too much blood. Her body gave up. She died on the operating table 10 minutes ago. Richard couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. He couldn't believe the words he just heard. The baby cried in his arms. Richard looked down at her. She was all he had left of Grace. He held her tighter. He broke down completely. His sobs echoed through the empty hallway. Nurses cried with him. Grace's funeral happened on a rainy Tuesday. Hundreds of people came. Richard stood at the front holding his daughter. He couldn't speak. His sister gave the eulogy. She talked about Grace's strength. She talked about how Grace never gave up even when life tried to destroy her. She talked about Grace's kindness and her programs that helped so many women. People cried openly. Mama Joy wept in the front row. She said Grace was like a daughter to her. She said she was proud of everything Grace became. She thanked Richard for loving Grace the way she deserved. Richard hugged her. They held each other and cried. David showed up at the funeral. He looked terrible. His clothes were dirty. He smelled like alcohol. He stood in the back. Tears ran down his face. He realized too late that he threw away a good woman. He realized Grace was the best thing that ever happened to him. His mother stood beside him. For once, she said nothing. Even she felt shame. Richard saw David but didn't say anything. He didn't have energy for anger. He didn't care about David anymore. His heart was broken in pieces. The only thing that mattered was the baby in his arms. He named her Grace Joy Lawson. Grace after her mother. Joy after Mama Joy, who helped her mother survive. They buried Grace in a cemetery on a hill. Richard bought a beautiful headstone. It said, Grace Lawson, a woman who rose from ashes and touched the sky. Beloved wife and mother, forever in our hearts. Richard placed roses on the grave. He promised to raise their daughter right. He promised to tell her about her mother's strength every single day. Richard went home to an empty house. The nursery was ready. The baby clothes were folded. Grace's perfume still lingered in their bedroom. Richard sat in the dark, holding his daughter. He didn't know how to do this alone. He didn't know how to be a father without Grace beside him. He felt lost. But baby Grace looked up at him with big eyes. She grabbed his finger with her tiny hand. Richard saw his wife in her face. He knew Grace would want him to be strong. She would want him to give their daughter a beautiful life. The first months without Grace were the hardest. Richard hired nannies to help with the baby, but he didn't want strangers raising his daughter. He changed diapers himself. He woke up for midnight feedings. He sang songs Grace used to hum. He cried while rocking baby Grace to sleep. The pain never went away. Richard stopped going to work as much. His sister managed the businesses. She told him to take time to grieve and bond with his daughter. Richard was grateful. He needed this time. He needed to learn who his daughter was. He needed to keep Grace's memory alive. Mama Joy visited every week. She helped Richard with the baby. She cooked meals. She told him stories about Grace selling oranges. She reminded him that Grace would be proud of him. Richard found comfort in her presence. She was a connection to Grace's past, a connection to the woman he fell in love with on that street corner. Baby Grace grew fast. She smiled at Richard. She laughed when he made funny faces. She reached for him when she was scared. Richard felt his heart healing slowly. His daughter gave him purpose. She gave him a reason to keep going. She was the best piece of Grace left in the world. Richard set up a trust fund for the women's program Grace started. He made sure it would run forever. He named it Grace's Second Chance Foundation. Every year on Grace's birthday, they hosted an event where women shared their stories of overcoming poverty. Richard brought baby Grace to these events. He wanted her to know what her mother stood for. People still talked about Grace in the city. Women who got jobs through her program told their children about her. Shop owners who worked with her spoke of her kindness. Grace became a symbol of hope. a reminder that life could change, that past failures didn't define the future. Richard made sure her legacy lived on. He visited Grace's grave every Sunday. He brought flowers. He talked to her about their daughter. He told her about every milestone. The first time baby Grace rolled over. The first time she said Dada. Richard wished Grace was there to see it all. But he felt her presence in quiet moments. David's life fell apart completely after Grace died. He lost his apartment. He slept in his car for weeks. He drank every day trying to forget. But he couldn't forget Grace's face. He couldn't forget how he treated her. Guilt ate him alive. His mother tried to help him at first. She paid for rehab. She got him a place to stay. But David kept messing up. He stole from her. He lied to her. Finally, she gave up. She said he made his own choices and now he had to live with them. David ended up on the streets. The same streets where Grace once sold oranges. One day, David stood on the corner where he first saw Grace with her basket. He remembered driving past her without recognizing her. He remembered laughing in his new car with his girlfriend. Shame burned inside him. He fell to his knees and cried. People walked around him. Nobody cared about the broken man on the sidewalk. David heard about Grace's funeral too late. He heard about the foundation Richard started in her name. He saw pictures of baby Grace in the newspaper. The child had Grace's smile. David realized that could have been his child. That could have been his life. He threw everything away because his pride mattered more than love. He tried to contact Richard once. He called his office and asked to speak to him. Richard's secretary said Mr. Lawson had no interest in talking to him. David understood. He had no right to ask for anything. He destroyed Grace when she needed him most. He didn't deserve forgiveness. David eventually got help from a homeless shelter. They gave him a bed and meals. They helped him get sober. A counselor talked to him about his anger and shame. David started to understand that he became like his mother. He let status and money define people's worth. He forgot that character mattered more than success. He got a job washing dishes at a restaurant. It wasn't much, but it was honest work. David thought about Grace every day. He wished he could tell her he was sorry. He wished he could take back every cruel word. But it was too late. Grace was gone. And David had to live with that pain forever. 3 years passed. Baby Grace was now a little girl. She had long curly hair like her mother. She loved books and drawing. She asked Richard questions about everything. She was smart and curious. Richard saw so much of Grace in her. It made him smile and hurt at the same time. Little Grace asked about her mother often. Richard showed her pictures. He told her stories. He said her mother was the bravest woman he ever knew. He said she came from nothing and built herself up. He said she never stopped fighting. Little Grace listened with wide eyes. She said she wanted to be brave like her mother. Richard took her to the foundation events. Little Grace watched women share their stories. She saw women who escaped bad situations, women who found jobs and hope. Richard told her that her mother made this possible. Little Grace felt proud. She asked if she could help when she got bigger. Richard said yes. Mama Joy became like a grandmother to little Grace. She taught her to cook. She told her stories about selling oranges with her mother. She explained that life wasn't always easy, but good people made it better. Little Grace loved Mama Joy. She called her Grandma Joy. Richard never remarried. People asked him why. They said he was still young. They said little Grace needed a mother. Richard said Grace was the only woman he would ever love. He said their daughter had plenty of love from him and everyone who cared about them. He didn't need to replace Grace. Nobody could ever replace her. Richard took little Grace to the cemetery on Grace's birthday every year. They brought flowers and balloons. Little Grace talked to her mother's grave. She told her about school. She told her about her friends. She said she missed her even though she never met her. Richard's heart broke and healed at the same time watching his daughter. The Women's Foundation grew bigger. They helped thousands of women across the country. Richard hired people Grace helped years ago to run programs. He made sure everything stayed true to Grace's vision. He made sure her name stayed alive. He made sure people remembered that Grace Lawson was more than a poor woman who married rich. She was a fighter who never gave up. Little Grace started school. She made friends easily. She shared her toys. She helped other kids who felt left out. Teachers said she had a kind heart. Richard wasn't surprised. She was Grace's daughter. Kindness ran in her blood. One day, little Grace came home from school upset. A girl in her class said her mother was dead because she wasn't strong enough. Little Grace cried in Richard's arms. She asked if it was true. Richard held her tight. He said her mother was the strongest person he knew. He said sometimes strong people's bodies get tired. He said it wasn't about weakness. It was about her mother giving everything she had to bring little Grace into the world. Little Grace understood. She said her mother was a hero. Richard agreed. He said Grace saved him when he didn't know he needed saving. He said she taught him what real strength looked like. He said little Grace had that same strength inside her. She just had to believe in herself the way her mother did. Richard expanded the foundation to include education programs. They gave scholarships to girls who wanted to go to school but couldn't afford it. They named it the Grace's Hope Scholarship. Hundreds of girls got education because of it. Richard wanted little Grace to see this when she got older. He wanted her to understand the impact her mother had on the world. Mama Joy got sick when little Grace turned 5. Richard took care of her. He moved her into his house. Little Grace sat with her every day. She read books to her. She brought her flowers from the garden. Mama Joy smiled and said little. Grace reminded her so much of her mother. She said she was blessed to know both of them. Mama Joy passed away peacefully in her sleep. They buried her next to Grace. Richard made sure her headstone said, Mama Joy, the woman who helped an angel survive. Little Grace cried at the funeral. She said she lost 2 mothers now. Richard told her that both women would always live in her heart. He said love never dies, even when people do. Richard and little Grace continued their Sunday visits to the cemetery. Now they visited 2 graves. They brought flowers for both women. They told stories. They laughed and cried together. 10 years after Grace died, Richard stood at a podium in front of 500 people. They were celebrating the foundation's anniversary. Women who got help through the program sat in the audience. Some were now business owners, some were teachers, some were nurses. All of them were survivors. All of them owed part of their success to Grace's vision. Richard told Grace's story. He told them about finding her on a street corner selling oranges. He told them about her past pain and her incredible strength. He told them she died bringing their daughter into the world. He said Grace's life proved that no matter how far you fall, you can rise again. He said second chances were real. Grace was living proof. The audience stood and clapped. Women cried. They shouted Grace's name. Richard felt tears run down his face. He looked to the side of the stage. His daughter stood there. She was now 13 years old. She was beautiful and confident. She wanted to speak at the event. Richard nodded at her. Little Grace walked to the microphone. She wasn't nervous. She looked at the crowd and smiled. She said she never met her mother, but she knew her through stories. She knew her mother sold fruit on streets. She knew her mother was thrown away like trash by someone who should have loved her. She knew her mother never gave up. She said she was proud to be Grace Lawson's daughter. Young Grace announced she wanted to join the foundation when she finished school. She wanted to help women like her mother. She wanted to prove that her mother's sacrifice meant something. The crowd exploded with applause. Richard cried openly. His daughter was Grace reborn, strong, compassionate, determined. After the event, Richard and his daughter drove to the cemetery. They placed flowers on Grace's grave. Richard told Grace their daughter was growing into an amazing person. He said she had Grace's heart. He said he kept his promise to raise her right. He said he loved Grace as much today as the day he asked her to marry him. Young Grace knelt by her mother's grave. She whispered that she would make her proud. She would carry on her legacy. She would help women who felt broken and forgotten. She would show them that their past didn't define their future, just like her mother showed the world. Richard held his daughter's hand. They stood there in silence. The sun set behind them. 2 lives forever shaped by one incredible woman who rose from nothing and changed everything before she left too soon. Your past failures don't define your future worth. Grace went from successful businesswoman to homeless street vendor, yet she never lost her inner strength. When given a second chance, she rebuilt her life and used her success to help others who were struggling. The story shows that rock bottom isn't the end. It can be the foundation for something greater. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about rising again. Grace didn't succeed because she never failed. She succeeded because when life knocked her down repeatedly, she kept getting back up. She sold oranges with dignity. She accepted help without shame. She rebuilt from zero. Never judge someone's worth by their circumstances. Look around you. The person struggling today might be tomorrow's success story. The homeless person, the street vendor. The person who lost everything, they have value and potential. Don't write people off based on where they are right now. Share with us what you learned in this story. Please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and turn on your notifications button to get an update of our next interesting story. Thank you for your support always.